Hello everyone, it's Daniel from TechMind Factory and welcome to this next video from the series called IdentiSphere Explorer. In this video, we are going to talk about single logout with OIDC Back-Channel in Auth0. So let's start. So let's start with logging out. You probably will say, hey, it's simple. It means that we are just ending the current session for the authenticated user. That's it. Not a big deal. However, believe me or not, but it's not so simple. And let me discuss why. So let's start with authentication first. So to access application and its features, obviously user must be authenticated. Okay, users, they have to authenticate first to access application's features. And now, the thing is that authentication is the process of confirming who the user is. We want to know who the user who is accessing our application. And once the user is successfully authenticated and user's identity is verified, there is a new authenticated session established. However, does it mean that there is only one session? Authentication session? No. Actually, there are different types of authenticated session. So it can be Auth0 or IDP session. So when user logs in by using universal login page with Auth0, Auth0 creates a new authenticated session. So it's typical scenario. Yes, we have application is secure with identity provider, in this case Auth0. So before user can actually access specific features in the application, user is redirected to authorization endpoint of Auth0, so the login page, and user authenticates there. Once authentication is done, user is redirected back to the application with confirmed identity. So on Auth0 side or IDP side or identity provider side, there is session created. But once the user is authenticated, there can be also application session created. So once user is authenticated with identity provider, so in this case Auth0, application creates its own session for the user, typically leveraging cookies in the browser. Okay? So it means that application establishes its own session with the information about the user. So application actually doesn't have to make any connection to identity provider. Application just knows that user is authenticated, application has information about the user, and in this case, we have application session established. And the thing is that there can be also third-party identity provider session. Okay, so third-party identity provider can be used to authenticate users through Auth0 using Facebook, for instance, or LinkedIn or Google. So in this case, we talk about this federation where I have the login page displayed on Auth0 side, but also I have the option to sign in with third-party identity provider, which is Facebook, Google, LinkedIn. And after successful authentication there, the thing is that identity provider, this third-party identity provider like Facebook, creates its own authentication session. Okay, so as we can see, there can be multiple authentication sessions established. So now let's talk about this scenario in more details. Let's dive into it. So there is a user, and obviously user is using browser to open or access specific web application. And now, when user authenticates against Auth0, there is Auth0 session created, okay? And the thing is that Auth0 will drop authentication or session cookie into the browser, and on Auth0 side, Auth0 knows that, hey, this user was successfully authenticated and there is existing session for this user. And the thing is that obviously we have a chance to sign in with third-party identity provider. And again, when we sign in with Facebook or Google, those services or identity providers in this context, they will drop their own authentication or session cookies into the browser. And obviously, once we are successfully authenticated through Auth0 and let's say, a third-party identity provider, once the application receives information about the user from identity provider in form of tokens, application is creating its own session for the user. And again, typically for web applications, this information is stored in the cookies. And actually, as we can see, we have three different kinds of scenarios where authentication session can be established. Okay, so now let's talk about the logout, so about termination of the authenticated session. So user can decide to log out, which means that authentication session should be terminated, okay? Like we are signing out or logging out, so we want to terminate authentication session. However, it's important to remember that there are different authenticated sessions mentioned earlier, yes? This can be third-party identity provider session, Auth0 identity provider session, application authentication session, and so on and so forth. So we must decide which session will be terminated. Do we want to terminate Auth0 session and application session, for instance? And to summarize, user can decide to log out from the application Auth0 or third-party identity provider. Okay, because in the typical scenarios where we leverage third-party identity providers, you can imagine the situation where user has Facebook opened and user is actually authenticated against Facebook, and user is opening the website that is secured with Auth0, but Auth0 has this federation or trust relationship with Facebook. So when user will click, hey, sign me in with Facebook, then user will not have to provide any credentials because there is SSO, so single sign-on, and user will be automatically authenticated in the application. And now the question is that when user will click logout button in this application, should the user be logged out from application, Auth0 and Facebook, for instance? Or maybe, like user prefers to have a session with Facebook active and user would like to only log out from the application. So you see, it's not so simple actually. I mean, logout, it's not so simple when you really dive into this topic. So basically, user can decide to log out from some of those sessions, or user can actually decide to terminate all of them. Okay, perfect. So let's talk about single or global logout here, okay? So logout that ends sessions across multiple applications is called global or distributed logout, okay? So in a typical scenario, the logout you probably saw and we know from different kinds of applications is the logout where we click logout button in the application that is actually displayed in our browser, and we are signing out or logging out from the application. The session is terminated, that's it. However, think about the scenarios where, let's say, you authenticated and accessed the same application on different devices or different browsers. And let's say that once you finish the session in one application on one device, you would like to, log out from all the applications on each device where you actually authenticated, yes? So it means that for something like this, we will need distributed or global logout. So when a user logs out of one of the applications sharing the same authenticated session, a logout request is sent to the other applications to terminate the session. That's what I will be showing in this video. But the thing is that it's not only about the same application, it's also about different kinds of applications where user has active authentication session. So let's say that I have application A, B, C, and I'm logging out from application A, but I would like to also automatically log out from application B and C. This is where global or distributed logout can help actually. So there are different approaches to implement global logout, and one of them is OpenID Connect Back-Channel logout, okay? And this is basically the standard for logging out proposed by OpenID Foundation, and this standard is implemented by Auth0, and that's why I decided to create this video to discuss how actually it works. Okay, so let's discuss single logout flow, okay? So here is this great picture provided by Auth0 team here. So there is Auth0, so our identity provider. There is application A, application B, and now what's happening here? So application A has a callback URL registered in Auth0. I will be showing this in the Auth0 dashboard, but important thing is that application A has some URL or some endpoint that can be called by Auth0 on the logout, and this will be discussed in this video. So application A is registering this callback URL in Auth0, and application B is doing the same thing. So for both applications, we have this logout callback URL registered in Auth0. It means that Auth0 will call this URL or this endpoint of our application when user is signing out or logging out. So now, as we can see in the first step, basically user is authenticating in the application A, and Auth0 is returning ID token to application A. And this ID token includes seed, and seed is the claim, and this is actually the session ID claim. So information about the active authentication session on Auth0 side for the user. And now, from the application B perspective, user is also authenticating against Auth0, and again, Auth0 is returning ID token with seed claim, so session ID. And now, in both applications, user is authenticated. Okay, that's very important. So in application A and B, we have active authentication session. And now what will happen? Let's say that in application A, user decided that user would like to log out from this application. So obviously in this case, user is using a front channel for that. I mean, user is literally clicking logout button, and obviously there is this redirection to Auth0 to end session or terminate session for this specific user. So Auth0 is terminating the session for this user. And the thing is that additionally, Auth0 is calling logout URL registered for application A. So application A can terminate this session if needed. And also Auth0 is calling this logout URL on the application B side. And application B can also terminate this local session for the user. So as we can see, it's really powerful because in this case, we can actually end session for the user in different applications registered in Auth0. So this is why it's called global logout, because we are logging out globally from all the applications for which obviously we registered this logout callback URL. Okay, but there are some caveats and I would like to discuss them here in this video. So let's talk about OIDC Back-Channel logout details. So first of all, important thing is that Auth0 supports the OpenID Connect Back-Channel logout specification in all tenants with an enterprise plan subscription. Specification leverages the session ID, the seed claim I mentioned before, which is actually included in the ID tokens, and logout tokens to coordinate session termination via back-channel communication. So as you can see here, I included this additional token, which is logout token, because this logout token is actually sent by Auth0 to application to inform which authentication session for which user should be terminated. And this logout token includes seed claim, which is session ID. And we will see it in the on the diagram I created. So logout tokens identify the end user and session to proceed with logout. Okay? So we use logout tokens to inform the application, hey, terminate the session for this user with this session ID. To use back-channel logout, an application must expose back-channel logout URI, reachable from Auth0, where the application expects to receive the requests with the logout token. That's very important. It has to be publicly reachable URI exposed by application, some kind of endpoint that Auth0 can call and actually can pass the logout token. Okay, so let's talk about the steps in this OIDC back-channel logout. So after successful user authentication, Auth0 adds the seed claim or session ID claim to the ID token during authentication. And now on the application side, application actually can store the seed value in its session store, linking it to the app specific session. Okay, and obviously, like this session store is recommended to be persisted, but this can be, like for instance, database or some other cache. Basically, the important fact is that application is actually storing this seed or session ID value. And on the user logout, Auth0 posts a logout token with sub and seed claims. So sub actually contains the user ID from Auth0 and seed is session ID to register logout callback URL on the application side. So application is actually informed, hey, finish the authentication session for this specific user with this session ID. And the application backend validates the logout token per OIDC specification. We are going to talk about it here. Extracts seed claim, locates the session, and terminates it. That's very important, okay? And now let's see it in actually on this diagram, and let's see those different kinds of steps here. So there is a user. Obviously, user clicks logout button in the application. And now application session is terminated, okay? And obviously there is also a call to logout URL on the Auth0 side. And important fact is that application can terminate user session immediately, or this application session for the user can be actually terminated when Auth0 will call this back-channel URI. I'm talking about two possibilities here. So application can instantly terminate application session, or it can wait until Auth0 will call it after user is logged out on the Auth0 side. So when we call Auth0 to log out the user, Auth0 session is terminated. Session cookie is obviously terminated in the browser. And what's happening next? So Auth0 will call our endpoint on other application side. It will use HTTP post and it will send the logout tokens. Okay, so we have those three applications here, three different applications here, where user also signed in or authenticated. So Auth0 will call each endpoint for each application to inform, hey, this is the logout token, this is the seed, so session ID, terminate session for this user. And each application is responsible for terminating the session for this specific user. Okay, so that's how it is. That's how it looks like. However, I want to mention a very important thing here, which is not so obvious. So in this flow, when we are globally logging out the user, so Auth0 is sending this request to other applications, hey, terminate user session. The thing is that here on the application side, as I mentioned before, we should have some session storage on the backend side. Some persistence storage is recommended, like database, for instance. So when actually Auth0 calls the application, this endpoint, application can look into the session storage using the backend component and can terminate the session for this user. Okay. So application needs a session storage to store information about seed for the authenticated user. That's very important, okay? And you can ask, why? Why? We have cookies, everything should work as expected. Again, it's not so obvious. Let me tell you why. So before I will do it, it's important to note that when logout request is received, backend should delete seed from the storage, okay? That's very important. We have to manage the state in this storage. So when user is authenticated, we store session ID there, so seed claim value from the ID token. And when session is terminated or Auth0 requests a session termination, we want to delete this session ID and the seed claim is included in the logout token. Okay, so why this storage here? So important fact is that when we look at the left side of the diagram, so here we have this front channel logout, like user is clicking logout button in the application, there is this redirection to Auth0. Obviously, everything is fine when it comes to cookies, because session cookie is terminated by Auth0, and I mean, everything is fine. However, with back-channel logout, we talk about actually processing something on the server side and on the backend side. So there is no cookie actually in this HTTP post sent. We don't have access to cookies from the browser anymore because this request is happening on the server side, on the backend side. So there is no access actually to the session cookie. Yeah, I mean, we cannot say like, hey, okay, I received the request from Auth0, so now let's clear the application session cookie from the browser. We cannot do it directly from the backend side, obviously. So there is no access to cookies as we are handling the request from the backend side. That's very important. So UI must be notified when session is terminated. That's very important. So if we have our web application, we have to notify the UI like, hey, there was some change. User logged out. So now, adjust the UI, change the view, display information that user logged out and session was terminated, something like this. So it's very important to remember that we do not have access to session cookie that is stored in the browser in this scenario. So we have to implement handling those notifications between UI and the backend part. Yes, and that's what I will be showing in the demo part in this video. Okay, so I said logout token when calling applications. So this is example of the logout token. This is from my Auth0 tenant. So as you can see, when we decode this token, we can see that obviously there are some standard claims included like issuer, so my Auth0 tenant. But important fact is that there is subclaim which contains the ID, unique ID of the user from Auth0. And there is also seed or session ID claim, which actually contains the ID of the session for the authenticated user. And obviously, under events claim, we have this specific information that this is actually back-channel logout event, okay? And this is defined by OpenID Foundation. So this token is actually sent by Auth0 to applications when we want to sign the user out globally. And now application obviously has to verify and validate this logout token. So there are a couple of security considerations here. So first of all, applications must have the ability to store the session ID, the seed claim value received during user login from ID token, to retrieve them later when receiving a back-channel logout token from Auth0. Okay, that's very important. Applications must verify and actually check the received tokens as per JOT validation best practices. So in this case, this logout token sent by Auth0 is in a JOT format, and actually we should follow all the best practices for JOT token validation. Like we should check the audience, the issuer, the signature here. It's very important to validate this token. And application must accept tokens issued only by trusted Auth0 tenants, actually. So we have to validate who actually issued this logout token. If we don't see our Auth0 there, like the tenant, we should not even process this token. We should just drop and reject such token. Applications must accept tokens only when they contain a seed value, session ID value that application recognizes. So tokens containing an invalid session ID, maybe it's expired or unrecognized, must be rejected. Okay, that's very important. So this seed claim is included in the logout token. Applications must expose the callback endpoints only via TLS. So for this communication, we only use HTTPS to send those, logout tokens. And applications are recommended to accept requests only from the published list of outbound IP addresses. Yeah, so we can also limit actually who can call this endpoint for logout on application side from which IP address. And applications are recommended to follow the general best practices in terms of monitoring and logging. So actually we should understand what's happening with our logout endpoint. We should monitor it and check it from time to time to see whether there are no some like weird things happening there. Maybe somebody is like sending some fake tokens there or fake information, checking something. So it's very important to keep an eye on those endpoints too. And applications are recommended to regularly clean stale or expired sessions. And any changes in the endpoint address must be synchronized with Auth0 configuration for the application. So every time we have any change to logout URL on the application side, we have to go to Auth0 and actually inform Auth0 like, hey, for this application, URL has changed. Okay, perfect. So another thing worth mentioning is back-channel logout initiators in Auth0. So here we can see this section from Auth0 application configuration, OpenID Connect back-channel logout. And as we can see, here is the place to paste the back-channel logout URI. Okay, so this URI will receive logout tokens we explained before. So here is my logout endpoint presented. As you can see, I host my application in the cloud and there is this single logout endpoint. And now we additionally have logout initiators. So we can either use selected initiators or all supported initiators. So what's going on here, okay? So the thing is that actually when we select selected initiators only, this back-channel URI will be called either when, like we are signing out from the application and we call logout endpoint on the Auth0 side. So it's called RP logout or relying party logout. So this is the situation where in application A, user is signing in or logging out, and then Auth0 will call actually the logout URI for each application where user has active session. And there is also IDP logout initiator. So in this case, we can call this logout URI when user is signing out from the external identity provider. And this scenario can be especially helpful when we use Okta federation with Auth0. And when user is logging out from Okta, we can also decide to log out the user from applications secured by Auth0. So it's really powerful. And yes, this actually configuration at the moment of recording this video was added quite recently when it comes to a global logout for Okta and Auth0. And also we have other initiators here. So we can call this logout URI every time user changes password or when account was deleted from Auth0, when the session is revoked, when email was changed, account was deactivated. So again, we can inform applications like, hey, this account was deactivated, terminate the session for this user. So it's very powerful, and as we can see, we can decide which initiators we want to use. Okay, perfect. So now it's time for practical overview. So I would like to actually present everything what I mentioned here in practice. So let's see the demo. Okay, so let's start with Auth0 dashboard. So here is IdentiSphere web application registered. And when we scroll down, we can see that here is this section called OpenID Connect back-channel logout. And under back-channel logout URI, I provided the URI of my web application. So as you can see, this application is hosted in Azure Cloud, and here is specific endpoint, API/single logout. Okay, so under this URI, under this endpoint, my application expects to receive the request from Auth0 with the logout token. And for this demo, I use only selected initiators in this specific scenario. And actually, from the configuration perspective on Auth0 side, that's it. So now what we can check actually, we can see in action how this global logout will look like. So here is my demo application. This is Blazor web application. And obviously here I can click login button. I'm redirected to login page on Auth0 side. I have to provide my email, my password, and obviously I'm successfully authenticated. And now the thing is that it's very important to mention this, we have two authentication sessions here. So there is authentication session created on Auth0 side, and obviously Auth0 dropped the authentication cookie in my browser, but also my application has the authentication session for the user. So it's called application session, as you remember from my video. Perfect. So as we can see here, I'm authenticated. I can access my profile, Daniel Tester. Here's my loyalty number. Everything is fine. And now I would like to show you what will happen if I sign in to the same application but using different browser, and how this global logout behavior will look like. So here I have two browsers open. On the left side, we have Google Chrome, where I'm successfully authenticated and I can use IdentiSphere demo application. And on the right side, I have Microsoft Edge browser with the same application, but there I'm not authenticated. So right now I would like to present how this global logout will look like. So on the left side, I'm authenticated. Here is hello Daniel Tester, greeting, I can access my profile. And now on the right side, I will authenticate. So I'm accessing the same application, but from the different browser, okay? And this can be also different device. Right now I'm presenting on the same device, but actually it can be a separate device. And now, obviously, I can access my profile section here. Everything works as expected. So now let's see what will happen when I log out from the application in the Google Chrome. So I click Logout button. And as we can see on the right side, there is this information displayed. Let me make it full screen actually. We can see the information that authentication session expired. Please authenticate again to use application. When I click confirm button, as we can see, I'm logged out. Why? Because underneath Auth0 called logout URI of this application, and application terminated the session. So now let's discuss the details when it comes to implementation in the source code. Okay, so here is Visual Studio and my Blazor web application project. As you remember, I mentioned that when using Back-Channel logout, we don't have direct access to cookies from the browser because it's happening on the server side, from the backend side actually. So that's why when we process this request sent by Auth0, we have to also notify the UI, and I want to show you this implementation. So let's open the backend side of this project. And under controllers here, I have this single logout controller and this one method, logout user async. So actually, I'm using this controller to expose this endpoint that will be called by Auth0 when user is logged out. And what's happening there? So first of all, I need to extract the logout token from this request. And then if there is any value sent, I want to actually validate the logout token using the logout token validation service. So here I have this method called validate logout token async. Let's look what's happening there. So as you probably remember, I mentioned that we have to validate logout token in exactly the same way we validate any other token. So that's very important to be mentioned. So obviously, there are some other things we need to validate in this token specifically for this scenario. However, as you can see under validation parameters here, obviously, I want to check the signature, I want to validate the issuer, the audience in this claim, the lifetime. And once I validate this token, I know that this is the valid token actually issued by my Auth0 tenant. Then I need to validate a couple of more things. So first of all, as you remember, I mentioned that there is this special claim called events included in the logout token, and we need to check whether it contains this specific value. This is from OpenID Connect specification for the Back-Channel logout. And also, we have to check, that's what you will see in the documentation, we have to check whether this token does not contain nonce claim. And if there is no nonce claim included, then we consider this token as valid logout token. So obviously, if there is anything wrong with this token, I return null here. So if we get back to our controller here, actually, if validation fails, I return bad request, and Auth0 obviously will process this request, will store this information in the logs, and actually the process will be completed. So here, if actually this logout token is valid, I want to notify about the user global logout. So this is actually this piece I mentioned related to notifying the UI like, hey, user signed out, do something. And that's why I have this global logout state change notification service here. Let's look into it. As you can see, I have only one action here, and I'm using events in C#. That's something specific about the about .NET and C# language. So I use events here to actually communicate between different components in my application. So I have this global logout state change notification service. I have this one action, one event, user logged out globally. And I want to notify subscribers about this fact, which I will show you in a minute. So once I notify the UI, I also extract the seed from the token, so session ID. And as you remember, I mentioned that on the application side, we need to use this session store, session storage actually. And in this case, what I need to do, I need to delete the session ID from this session store. So I'm deleting this seed here, and obviously I return OK 200 to Auth0. And now, once I have this implemented, there is a question, okay, so how actually UI will be notified here? So as you remember, I mentioned that I have this user logout globally event. And now when I open components here and layout, you can see that I have this component, this Razor component in the Blazor, which actually handles those changes and is responsible for displaying this dialog I presented to you during the demo, like, hey, authentication session expired. So as we can see, when this component is initialized, we want to subscribe to on-user logout globally event. Okay, so here, once we subscribe to this, we have the possibility to react on the UI side. So here, what I do actually, when this event is triggered, I use dialog service here to display this alert. So as you remember, I displayed this alert, authentication session expired, please authenticate again to use application. Okay, and there is only one button, confirm. And actually, when this dialog is closed by the user and this action is accepted, here I use Navigation Manager to navigate to authentication/terminate session. Okay, so what will happen here? My application will use this URL. If I open Identity Service Collection extensions, we can see here that for my application roots, I define this specific root, authentication/terminate session. And what I'm doing here, I'm redirecting user to the main page of the application, and I'm signing out the user from the application. So in this case, as you can see, I'm terminating application session. And please note that here I do not call Auth0 logout endpoint anymore because I don't have to. Because the fact is that once application A signed the user out using front channel, so actually we inform Auth0 that, hey, this user signed out, Auth0 killed the session on Auth0 side, and from now Auth0 must only inform those other applications like B and C that, hey, user signed out, I killed the session, kill the session too on your side. So that's why here I do this redirection. There is also this method called signout-async used, and here I'm terminating the session cookie for this application. And that's it. That's why actually when we sign out from one application, this other application in Edge reacted to those changes, because I received the logout token here. I validated this specific logout token. I notified the UI, and additionally, I also deleted the session ID from this session store. And that's how it works actually. However, additionally, you can ask, hey Daniel, but where you actually store the session ID after user authentication? So, as you probably know, in .NET, we have access to different kinds of OpenID Connect events. We can subscribe to them in the code. So, as we can see, there is this event onToken_validated. So, actually, once the ID token is validated after successful authentication, what I do actually here, I extract the seed claim value and sub claim value from the ID token. And then what I actually do, I retrieve the authentication user session store reference here, and I use the method called add user session ID. And here I use the seed value as a key, and obviously the value is the user identifier from Auth0. So in this case, I always have this key value pair, which is unique key, which is session ID, and then unique value, which is user ID. And every time when there is a need to access information about active sessions in my application, or to access information about the user ID, I can use this session store to actually retrieve this information. So that's how it works when it comes to authentication. The last important thing I want to mention here is the fact that I utilize global logout feature in the IdentiSphere platform, which I architected and developed. If you would like to learn more about this platform, I encourage you to visit techmindfactory.com website and open Advisory tab. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next videos.